staring at me. Welcome. I am your lovely host of the AI panel discussion, our last session of the day. And that means I won't be offering my insight on this topic, but our fine panelists will be. And they are Mr. Geoff Perlman, Mr. Yusuf Shah, and Mr. Jim Meyer. And I'm going to let them each do their own introductions. They decided they didn't want me making up something random, which I'm usually pretty good at. But we'll let them do that. And then I have a few prompts here that I will ask them, and they'll just start to discuss. If you have questions or comments about what they're discussing, you'd like to chime in or something like that, just raise your hand, and I might call on you. And then we'll continue the discussion. And then we've got a few things to go through, kind of random stuff I'll throw out in different areas, and we'll just see how things flow. It's pretty casual, but I think this is a pretty hot-button topic, so should be a lot of interesting things being talked about here. So we're going to go, because this is London, we're going to go left to right, so we'll start with Jim.
So I'm Jim Meyer, and I'm semi-retired, and I just like to play with technology. That's what I kind of do for my living. And I kind of got into AI because I did have a paying project that I needed to do photo identification and extract metadata from photos. And that's what got me hooked into the whole thing. Most of what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years is learning how to authenticate AWS and Google and all that stuff, which is much harder than actually using the AI. The authentication's the harder part. But generally, I don't know much more about AI than anybody else who reads what they can about it. So I'm no researcher or anything like that.
All right. Yousaf?
Similar from me. Actually, forget it. AI, can you give a summary for the panel talk of me, please?
Hello? Hi? Is this thing on? Can you all hear me? Great. Please welcome Yusuf Shah to our AI panel discussion. As the founder of a retail software business in London and a Xojo user for over a decade, Yusuf brings invaluable expertise and insights into the intersection of AI and software development.
Wow,
Well, it must be true if the AI says
Must be
so.
true. It must be true.
Jeff, you're up.
I'm not sure how I follow that. All I can say is that I'm naturally intelligent, as opposed to artificially intelligent. Yeah. Biologically intelligent. No, I've always been interested in AI. Even before it was called AI, back when the predecessor to AI was things called expert systems, and I was interested in Prolog and Lisp and things like that, and then I realized that's all they were. They were just expert systems. They weren't really intelligence, but that was the sort of predecessor. And I'm a big science fiction fan, so obviously AI is always a hot thing in science fiction. And the idea that it's interesting because for me the idea that we could create a intelligence that truly could pass the Turing test, that would really truly be indistinguishable no matter how I communicated with it from another human being. To me, that's fascinating. We're not there yet, but and you'll probably hear in this discussion that my take on what's going on right now in AI, that's a lot of vowels, doesn't seem to support the idea that I'm really enthusiastic about AI, but I actually really am.
So you don't think we've passed the Turing test?
Oh gosh, no.
Oh, I do.
Not even close.
All right, we'll have some debate coming up.
I definitely do. I think you talk to ChatGPT and you don't know that you're talking to a machine.
Because it's making so many mistakes?
But a lot of mistakes, you don't know there's hallucinations and all that.
Yeah.
But You don't know that necessarily. I mean, if you're asking a question you don't know something about, you don't know if it's hallucinating or not.
Well, so I asked it how it felt about something, and it said, as a large language model, I don't have any personal opinions. So that told me right away.
Well, in that case, yeah, but
Wait, that
Well,
just
wait,
tells
in
me
that
that
case-
you haven't asked the right question.
Oh, no. Okay, so the way the Turing test works is you're supposed to ask questions, and typically in the past it's been you ask questions in a very narrow field, right? You can't ask anything you want. And they would consider something to pass under those circumstances. Well, we're well beyond that now. So I need to be able to, for it to be pass the Turing test, I need to be able to interact with it in any way I want, ask it anything. A person's not going to say, well, I'm a computer and I can't have an opinion on anything. People have personalities, they have experiences, they've formed opinions, and for me, for an AI to pass the Turing test, it needs to have all of that, right? And we're not close to that. Oh, that's the other thing. For me, an AI can be told it's wrong if it's going to pass the Turing test, and it can then go out and find out why it's wrong, figure it out, and say, oh, you're right, I was wrong, and here's why I was wrong, and then be right from then on about that thing.
And it definitely can do that now.
No.
Absolutely 100% can do it.
It doesn't. I've used it. I've had it give me an error, and then I've corrected it. I mean, it's even said to me. Well, here's the other thing: is I tell it it's wrong about something, and it says, "Oh, you're right. Yeah, I was wrong, and here's the right. You're right. You got the right answer."
but
And then, hang on. And then I can have someone else ask that question, the exact same question I just asked, and it gets another wrong answer.
but people do that too. And that's
No, but the way
Not a minute later.
actually, if you're using GPT, the way it works is it's a stream that is on for you. So anything it learns during its discussion with you,
Right.
from then on will carry on. It won't take what you've said and then apply it to somebody else. Can you imagine if it did that?
Why wouldn't it do that if it was right?
Because it doesn't know if you were right or wrong. So,
Well, and
so
here's-
they've locked in a training model and saying
Yeah,
this is what
yeah.
it's trained in.
So
If you're having a conversation with it, it will learn. But as soon as you walk away, forget everything you said apart from your conversation. If you come back to it.
right. So let me give an example. Okay. So I asked. I told this is ChatGPT 3 now. I asked it. I said, I'm going to teach you a game. Do you want to play a game? And it said yes. Okay. I said, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. And you can ask me 3 questions to guess the number. But you can't ask me what the number is. That's one question you cannot ask. You want to play? It said yes, right? So I thought of a number, and it said, is the number odd? I said yes. Is the number greater than 50? I said yes. Is the number divisible by 3? I said yes. It said, then the number has to be 63. Okay, well, that's wrong. It didn't say the number might be 63. It didn't say the number could be one of these 4 numbers. It confidently gave me one answer, which was the wrong answer. So,
But I would say again that doesn't mean it's a machine, because human could make the same mistake.
Human could have
And that's the
misunderstood what you were
Turing
asking.
test says, can you tell whether it's a human or a machine?
yeah.
And I would say no, because a human could have done that too. Now, sure, if you spend enough time and there's so many mistakes and on, either you're talking to a dumb person, which there are in the world, or it passed. And I think it passes.
So I think that that large language models are, I read an article recently, and the point of the article really wasn't about artificial intelligence, it was about something else. But they talked about large language models, and they came up with they described them very well. And this is a one-sentence description. If you haven't read, like the Wolfram Research paper on large language models, they go into excruciating detail on how they work. This is a one-sentence description. Large language models are designed to predict the next word in a sequence. When they're trained with enough data, they've proved capable of engaging in what looks like actual conversation. Now, there's two things in there that are really important. One is you put in a prompt, and what it does is it computes the probability of what's the first word in the first sentence in the answer to that prompt, and then it computes the second word and the third word, etc. A human being knows what they're talking about. They know the subject. They're not just computing words and responding back. They know what they're talking about. The large language models do not. They don't know what they're talking about. They're creating a response, but they don't know what they're talking about, right?
So to jump in with that, how do we take advantage of these models? So I guess,
Changing the subject.
yeah, I am definitely changing the subject. I don't want us arguing about what AI is or isn't for the next 45 minutes, because I'll probably fall asleep. But what I tend to refer to AI as, I think I mentioned this to Yousaf earlier, as IA, more of an intelligent assistant type thing than artificial intelligence. But anyway, it looks like it has some pretty useful applications. So I'm wondering what you guys might think of how AI can affect how it's going to affect the software industry. How can it be used to make changes there? How do you think it's going to work there? Anybody?
You're looking at me?
Yeah, I'm looking at you.
With 3.5, I've had very good success getting SQL commands. I mean, in mind-boggling success. But there's also been failures. I mean, three tables joined together, and I looked at what it did, and it was just, it was shocking. I said something like, list the names, blah, 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 where something, something. And there was no field in any of the tables called names. There was one called F name and L name, and it pulled those out, and it assumed that that's what I was talking about with names. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. So from that standpoint, that seems pretty good. But the range of SQL that it's been trained on is probably huge.
Yeah,
Now, when I ask it to write some Xojo code, it's horrible. It's miserable. It's not usable code.
So I've had a lot of success with, not to the level of accuracy you had with SQL, but I've asked it to write code. Now, in the early versions that we saw of Chat GPT-3, if you asked it to write Xojo code, what it didn't tell you is that it was really writing VB.NET code.
Oh, it's cheating.
Yeah. It knows that Xojo and VB.NET are very similar. And the code was, maybe 75% of the way there. And that's useful to get you started. If you really aren't sure how to write a routine, and you could ask ChatGPT, I'm just going to say a large language model, because there's more than one. If you could ask it, write me a method that does the following, and even if it's not 100%, if it just gets you started, that's talk about you wanting to know how it can be useful. That's really useful. Now I will tell you that ChatGPT 4, it knows Xojo. That's a big change from 3 to 4, because I asked it to write a routine that it would have to know our framework to write, right? I asked, it was really simple too. I said, write a method that given some data as a string and a file name as a string, writes the data to a file on the desktop. That's what I asked it to do. And it generated a method that used folder item, it used special folder, it used text output stream, and it made two minor mistakes in the code in the enumeration. But it worked. I mean, I changed those two things and it worked. So getting you started with something, I think, is a place where it can be really useful.
All right, I know Yousaf has some interesting thoughts on this. So.
Well, I think the thing is, so to a certain extent, we've lived with this kind of thing for quite a long time. I mean, I've been interviewing software engineers for the last 20 years, and I think over the last 10 years, one of the questions I always ask them is, if I turn off Google and Stack Exchange, can you still write PHP? And I can tell you the look of horror that you get when you ask that question, and I could probably put it to you guys, okay, notwithstanding the fact that the Xojo documentation is on you need the internet to get it, but how many of you can finish a whole Xojo project without the internet, without Google?
We have local documentation.
We do, but that's not the point. The point is, when you get to a certain problem, and I think the sites such as Stack Exchange, which if you take a more pragmatic view of it, they've filled in the gaps in documentation. And let's face it, tech guys are terrible at writing documentation. We all admit it.
No, I can't admit that.
I think they are, and
let's say most are.
If you give AI some documentation written in whatever language you're capable of doing, it's going to do a better job than you. I guarantee it. Okay, AI. Can you tell me the difference between arrays and dictionaries in Xojo?
In Xojo, arrays and dictionaries are both used to store collections of data, but they have different structures and use cases. Arrays. 1. An array is an ordered collection of elements where each element can be accessed using an index, a numerical value. The index starts from 0, and each subsequent element has an index value incremented by 1. 2. All elements in an array are of the same data type, such as integer, string, or a custom class.
I mean, we could go on with this, but the thing you can't do is, okay, AI, that was great, but can you just give me a summary of that and give it to me in Spanish, please?
En resumen, utiliza arreglos en Xojo cuando necesites una colección ordenada de elementos con un índice numérico, y utiliza diccionarios cuando necesites una colección desordenada de pares clave-valor con más flexibilidad en términos de tipos de datos y claves.
So the overwhelming thing with it is, I think you will get a lot more out of this technology if the first thing you've got to do is admit it does do things that you can't do. It has read every single line of GitHub out there.
Yeah,
Let me finish that.
Okay.
It has read every book out there. And actually, the whole piece of it not being able to, you say that it reads what it reads and it doesn't discern any additional knowledge. I disagree. I've actually fed it the documentation for our digital signage platform. Now, it's not very good, our documentation for the digital signage platform, but it's very factual, and it involves, as you can imagine, with digital signage, displays and all sorts of things to do with TVs and graphics. But I didn't teach it what a TV is. I didn't teach it what resolutions TV screens come in at. And then when I ask it questions about my platform, having read that manual, it's able to give me an answer. I'll give you another example here. So,
Dad, you came prepared.
Yeah, he did his homework.
Yeah. AI, is 100 pixels a good resolution to put a graphic up on my display?
A photo with a size of 100 by 100 pixels is not recommended for use on platypus display. It's considered too small, and when displayed on a screen, the image will be stretched, resulting in a low-quality, pixelated appearance. For optimal display quality, it's recommended to use images with higher resolutions, such as 4K, 3840 pixels by 2160 pixels, or at least Full HD, 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels.
Actually, and can you carry that on German, please?
Für eine optimale Anzeigequalität wird empfohlen, Bilder mit höheren Auflösungen zu verwenden, wie zum Beispiel 4K 3840px x2160px.
Bob, you were going to ask something.
I think this sounds dangerous.
It is. It's
What I'm concerned with, and we get a whole lot of spam calls, this sounds really real. And if you're an old person like me,
Yeah, not Bob.
no, seriously, my son used to call up and say ancient one. But I know what scam sounds like, and they're trying to get your credit card, and they're going to say your son is in jail, and this sounds really, really real, much better than the stuff I'm hearing now.
So that's a different topic, but I will tell you it's worse than you think.
No, it's not.
No, it really is worse because people are getting scammed now by deep fake voices of people that are relatives of theirs.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be, I mean, if it's a different voice, somebody you don't know, but when it's somebody who appears to be your son, your daughter, your wife, your husband, whatever, and they can realistically do that voice, that's a lot easier to fake, to get past us.
And I mean, this seems really dangerous.
Yeah, but you know, with great power comes great responsibility,
Yes,
right?
we don't have great responsibility.
Well,
The history of humanity demonstrates that.
yeah,
Well, I agree. I mean, I think it's been very interesting. I don't know what you think, Jim, about this whole idea of trying to legislate against it. I mean, in my point of view, the second you legislate against it, all it's going to mean that the only people who use it are the bad actors.
right.
All the straight people are going to walk away from it.
You know-
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
I agree, but I mean,
So
it's given enough.
in the early part of the last century, it was believed to be impossible to run a mile in 4 minutes. And someone did it at the Olympics. And
No, not at the Olympics. Roger Bannister.
Roger
Oh,
Bannister, come on.
all right,
We're
whatever.
in the UK, Geoff.
Okay, got it. Maybe I'm thinking a 3-minute mile. Anyway, but the point being is, once somebody accomplished that, then lots of people did. So, you know, 5 years ago, you could have said, are we going to be able to build technology like this? And people have said, geez, I don't know, maybe someday. Well, now
Today's now.
we know it can be done. And once you know something can be done, it can be done over and over and over again. So, yeah.
Well, I'm scared to death of it, to sum it up. But, you know, any kind of legislation or anything like that isn't going to work. I mean, the Chinese aren't going to stop developing if, you know, the U.S. does, so to speak. But the other big concern, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is that this is driven by corporations at this point. This is not some worldwide consortium like the web or something, you know, that's trying to be neutral. These are for-profit corporations, Google, ChatGPT, Microsoft, Apple, whoever's in this. And they've got an agenda to make money. And that's, you know, we've seen what happened with Google Search. And Google Search just dominates now. And it's been bad because it dominates. And I can give you examples if you want, but, and I'm concerned that, you know, we're going to have this domination by corporations, and it's going to drown out any kind of effort to keep it neutral, keep scamming out, things like that.
I don't see how realistically, I mean, to a certain extent, I agree with you, but the problem is I don't see any way to avoid that, because the one thing we don't see, you know, when we use a large language model are the enormous resources that are going into making it work. It's not running on a PC in somebody's closet somewhere.
Yeah, but the problem is that you can take even ChatGPT. They have what they call fine tuning.
Right.
So you take all their huge running TPUs for 7 days, you know, 7 months or something to digest all this information, tensor processing units, and building these huge. And now you can just strip off a layer and put your own fine tuning in. I think they're doing what's also known as transfer learning, but I'm not sure. And put your own piece on top of this. So you don't have to start from scratch.
Right, right.
Well, I think what's interesting is, okay, you could be scared of it. I guess when cars came out, everyone, you know, people who had horses, we were terrified of them. You know, you had the Osmonds in the 60s singing about crazy horses. But actually, what's the answer to it? Do you just sit in your house and cower as cars drive by? You just say, do you know what, I'm going to buy a car and drive it, and I'm going to go and see my mom. And I think this is, for all the fear, there are many positive spins. I mean, we are, you know, there's a couple of uses there. If you take the instance that, you know, we're tech people. We're not very good at explaining things. And this can genuinely enhance our lives. It can make us more easy to understand. It can make concepts that we're trying to get across It can work them out and how to say them to people. I mean, I was sitting at the back there, and I did ask Christian if it was all right if I did this. And I just got AI to listen to Christian's talk. So this is live, it's not trained. So this was, if you like, the live training aspect. I just said, AI, just listen to this. And then I asked it some questions. Mm-hmm. So AI, I loved Christian's speech. Can you tell me what he was talking about, PDFs?
Christian has been using Dyna PDF for over a decade to enhance PDF features in social projects. Recently, they've added PDF UA1 support, which makes PDFs more accessible for screen readers by allowing users to highlight and label text elements, similar to HTML.
Yeah, so
actually, AI, just because, you know, that's all very well, but, you know, Christian wants some words to put on his website. Can you give me that in a way that is kind of sales and marketing speak?
Sure. Here are some examples of how these improvements can enhance your software.
Wrong one. I asked it how it could improve your software, explain it. But, yeah, give me some examples for his website.
Sure, let's do it. Introducing the latest and greatest features in Monkey Bread's Dyna PDF plugin. Elevate your software with cutting-edge PDF capabilities that cater to a diverse range of users. Our recent update brings PDF UA1 support, making your documents more accessible than ever, providing screen reader-friendly elements, and promoting an inclusive user experience. Stay ahead of the curve.
And it could have done that live, as he was speaking.
I actually changed our voice to a very selling voice.
Yeah.
Well, I did. And Christian, thanks for being a good sport and let me do that.
I
If there's something wrong in what we say, who says to the machine that's wrong and who's correcting?
So when you interact with a large language model, the interface has gives you the opportunity to indicate whether you got an answer right or wrong. And if you tell it this answer was incorrect, you can enter the correct answer, and a human being then has to review that and update the training data that it's trained on. That's the only way it gets beyond your session to other people. So there's a...
Who's that human being?
Well, that's the team behind the large language model.
Corporation guy, or-
That's the problem.
Yeah,
It's the corporation guys.
yeah.
That's exactly what I'm worried about, is because they're going to censor, that's an extreme word,
Well,
but
they're
they're going to
trying-
control that.
They're going to try to be neutral to the degree that they can, because they want to earn money from everybody. So they have to be Switzerland, right? They have to take a completely neutral position. I don't know if Switzerland's completely neutral, but I'm just,
They're not going to accept self-criticism. I mean, they're going to keep their nose clean.
right.
Let's say there's a mistake on Xojo code, and you know it, and you say to the machine it's wrong, and there's a human being who doesn't know Xojo code on the other side and says it's right. What can
Yeah,
you
so
do?
that's a really good question. If the large language model is wrong about some code, how does that ever get corrected? And I don't know if they have an answer for that yet. I will say this, the way I look at these, prior to the internet, right, you had to go to encyclopedias and dictionaries and computer manuals and all this stuff. And then the internet came along and search engines came along. And what did the search engines do? Well, they indexed everything so that you could type in a query and you'd get pages and pages of results. And it was then up to you to look through all those results and determine which one was the right answer, which one was the best answer. So what a large language model is doing is it's jumping to the end of that. It's skipping past all that. You say something in a very natural language, right? And you can refine what you're asking it to do, incrementally, and then it's going to go and find what it believes to be probabilistically the best possible answer and give that to you. Now, I do think that they need to be a little more humble. I think that it needs to say, this is one possible answer, whereas it tends to sound very, very confident, which I think is a problem, but I understand why they don't do it too.
But you can ask it to give you an answer in that form of voice.
What do you mean?
You can say, just give it to me, you know, don't be so confident, and just give it to me realistically. It will completely reword it.
Okay, but what I'm saying is it should do that from the get-go. It should be the reverse, right? Hey,
Yeah, but your initial, and I come back to this again, that the initial response of most people to this, well, I won't say most people, certainly not mine, is to, oh my God, I feel a bit threatened by this. I'm going to challenge it. I'm going to go out of my way to prove this is rubbish.
oh no,
And the point is, you know, it's not human, but it's certainly not rubbish.
Yeah.
And it's certainly very useful.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely
I mean, I
useful.
asked that question about pixels to 3 of my team. 2 of them couldn't even answer it.
Right.
One of them gave me an answer, and it wasn't anywhere near as useful as that. Now, if I was hiring somebody to be my online support person, you know, and let's not even let's not make it about me. Let's make it about my customers. If my customers were there and desperate to get something on the screen, do they want somebody saying, oh God, well, I've never really tried that, I'm not sure, I'll go and find out? Or do they want somebody to say, actually, you know, 100 pixels is rubbish, you really need to make it a little bit bigger, and I suggest you do this?
Oh no, for sure.
So
Don't get me
why
wrong.
is everybody's world not better from that?
Yeah. Oh, I'm not saying. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great. I love AI. You know, I started asking when I started using ChatGPT. I started asking it questions specifically to see how good it was. Right? I wasn't trying to defeat it. I mean, and I think it is very useful, and it's something that we are going to have to adjust to. Teachers are going to have to adjust to. We're going to, you know, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but our education system is more than 100 years old, and it was designed to produce factory workers, and that's not what we need today. So what's happening is, since the education system hasn't changed, its hand is going to be forced. What's going to happen is students are going to start using tools like this, and teachers are going to have to adapt to that. And I've read articles about teachers already doing it, right? Which is great.
So can I just stop you there, Geoff? Because what you just said was students are going to do this and they're going to do that. You didn't say, actually, what might happen is students are going to do this.
Well, no,
so
correct,
you've done exactly what AI does.
No, because,
just there.
No, but because they are already doing it. I've read articles about teachers saying, I've got students coming in with stuff that the answers they got from ChatGPT.
It's mimicking human nature.
Yeah.
And that's what human nature is.
Well, it mimics it by reading text that we wrote. It doesn't, I just want to say, it's a very good, to me, and I'm not trying to put it down here. To me, large language models are next generation search engines.
Well,
That's what they are. They're a
You know,
next generation search engine.
yeah.
Right.
I wish they wouldn't call it AI. I'd call it simulated intelligence.
Yeah, I agree.
Because that, to me, is more what
Accurate.
describes how it works. It's
Yeah.
simulated intelligence. It's not
Right.
real intelligence. You know, I look at the Xojo code that it wrote for me, and it doesn't know about data typing.
Right.
I mean, would you hire somebody that didn't know about data types? You know, it doesn't know the difference between an integer and a string. I mean, you know, it's simulating.
If I trained it on a bunch of random code, right? It can't tell the difference between good code and bad code. It's just going to look through there and find an answer. It's garbage in, garbage out. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. All that means is when you train it, you've got to train it with good data. Yeah.
On the topic of code, one of the reasons why the OpenAI stuff is so good on several languages is that they specifically set out to train it on Python, on everything they could find on GitHub.
Right.
And basically it's been trained by a bunch
And many other languages too.
Many
Many other languages, JavaScript.
They hired a bunch of expert programmers
Yeah.
and said, train it on this.
Right.
So that's why it's really, really good. And like it or not, that is 10 years from now, the world of software development is going to be completely different because of this.
Yeah. So,
Well, I'd like to jump in with that
Oh, yeah.
real quick, and as you know, we'll have to wrap up at some point before the sun goes cold, before the AI takes over, according to Jim. But how would, tying into at the beginning in your keynote, where you were talking about change a lot,
Yeah.
and Ian
Yeah.
was saying, software development is going to change a lot over the next 10 years. How do people here, just from a brainstorming standpoint, think that Xojo itself could make use of AI to make it better?
Well, I can tell you what I imagine. I imagine that someday you'll be, typing a line of code and it will predict what the next line is likely to be. And like we have autocomplete, right? It's sort of the next generation of autocomplete. And when you're not sure how to do something, there'd be some sort of prompt. And you can say, I'm trying to accomplish the following thing. And we'd have, talk about, you trained it on your manual. We trained it on a whole lot of quality code and our documentation and all that stuff so that it can be, you want the fastest answer you can get, right? So you can go track somebody down, you can go look at a manual, you can read an article, you can ask on the forum. But if you could just type in a question and get a quality answer, because, and this is something I want to emphasize, if I ask a human being and I know what Jim's going to say to this, when I ask a human being a question, they're a human being. I expect them to be flawed, right? They're not going to be 100% accurate all the time. It's different when I ask a computer, right? If Excel, if its formulas and functions were accurate 95% of the time, nobody would use Excel. So we're going to have to adjust to the fact that large language models are going to be wrong sometime, and we're not used to asking computers for answers and not always getting the right one, right? Now that is like a human being, right? But again, we know we're not interfacing with a human being, so we expect it to be right. And that's the challenge, I think, that AI has right now, is the accuracy needs to be high or people are going to be misled.
You want to add something to that?
When I started as a computer programmer, I'm very old, so I started a long time ago.
We're all very old.
The first job I was given was a financial thing, and I did it. And my boss said, take it to the accountant over there and show him. And I'd used a bunch of test data. And when I gave it to the accountant, he went mad. This is rubbish, this is all wrong, that doesn't do this. And he was reading the test data. Because it was produced by a computer, he thought it was real data. Now that might sound naive, but that's all I'm hearing from you, that what people hear from a computer, they believe. And the language you've been using is, it doesn't know this. ChatGPT doesn't know anything.
Right.
It's a generative, probabilistic, trained model.
Correct.
And all it's doing is harvesting knowledge on the probability of whatever fits the question you've asked. If you ask the wrong question, you'll get a very different answer. If you have to ask the same question in a different way, you get a very different answer.
Right.
The talk was supposed to be about AI, and we're dwelling on LLM. A friend of mine, a professor of computer science, gave me a very nice model, which is a Venn diagram, a box. And if you put in the bottom left-hand corner LLM, that's where ChatGPT is.
Yeah.
The next part of the Venn diagram is machine learning, which is erring on what you were saying, Jim, and starting to say there is learning in this model and it can analyze what it's about to say from the LLM as to whether it's right or not. The next model again is deep learning, and that's been used in Deep Blue when it beat the chess world champion and so on. And then above that is AI, neural networks. So LLM is way down in that Venn diagram, excuse me. And I just think the power of what we're hearing has yet to come.
Oh,
LLM is nothing compared to where we are with neural networks already.
Yeah, what we want, I think, is to be able to, as closely as possible, approximate the human mind, right? And there's a lot going on in the human mind. Being able to produce language is a tiny little fraction of that. Jim has done a lot of work with like AWS's AI stuff, image recognition, and that's another thing that we do, right? More than anything else, the human brain is a pattern recognition engine. That's what it primarily is, and it does good at that. But all these things are going to have to come together, and I think that humanity is seeing AI doing things that prior to this only humans did, and they're thinking that it's further along than it actually is. I'm anxious to see where it goes. Yeah.
Can I just ask one thing?
Actually, there was one more question from over here. What was he? Yeah.
I was often asked from other people, also they had questions. What is it? What is it? What is it about? What about our future? What is hope? And I often make some comparisons. I say, okay, you know CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. Yeah? What is that? Intelligence? Is it intelligence? No, finally it's investigation. And I say, okay, take AI as artificial investigation and not as artificial intelligence, because intelligence has emotional intelligence, scientific intelligence, has consciousness, which is completely missing, creativity,
Right.
ideas, nothing is there. So this is only artificial investigation. That's it. So this is one point. You made one other point, very, very good, very interesting. Neutral Switzerland. It's a metaphor,
Right.
metaphoric. Yeah. And now I'll tell you something. Switzerland is not neutral. Switzerland is the center of our world, because every oil, every gas, everything, gold, whatever, all this stuff runs through Switzerland completely. Even if you don't know it, look after it. And then think about what's going on now. This ChatGPT Switzerland, yes, all the money will go through them. That's it.
Well, a lot of it's going through Google, that's for sure.
Well, you asked Paul, what difference you think it would make to the world of programming, and let's just for argument's sake talk about the large learning models we have in front of us now. I mean, if you take the actual case for good that can be achieved,
For sure.
I think this is amazing things. I mean, I've traveled the world. I've been to the Far East, been to places like Japan, and I can tell you something, that across the world, we're lucky, you know, and I know there are people in this room who will understand this. The software is kind of run by the English-speaking people of the world. All the resources for software, the majority of them start in English. They're not localized in different languages. And you can see it. If you go to Japan, their online technology is quite frankly awful. And I'm pretty sure, or I'm reasonably sure, that a lot of that is down to the fact that in order to, Japanese people don't really speak English. And in order to get Japanese programmers to understand things, they've got to learn English. And then is their English of the quality to be able to look at Stack Exchange and work out which of those things is the right answer? But what we've got with the large learning models is a kind of global knowledge that can grow. It can deliver that knowledge in any language in the world to any country in the world. It's read every book that's to be read. It's read every line of code on GitHub.
Right.
And even if all it's doing is enabling those people who can't understand this, I think it's going to level up. I think it's going to level up. It's going to level up geeks that can't explain things in English. It's going to level up countries that haven't had access to knowledge. It's going to level up all sorts of things that we won't understand. I believe that the Xojo documentation is going to be amazing.
Well, it's not amazing,
Isn't
it? No, go ahead.
On another positive note, I think in the next 10 years, maybe less, I don't know. I'm making a prediction, was stupid. But the medical advances I think we're going to see are going to be astronomical. I think we're going to see things like cystic fibrosis, maybe Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. I think we're going to eliminate those diseases.
Well, I will say this. There are people in this room right now, I guarantee you, whose lives will be saved by AI.
I agree.
Because already we've got AI that can look at X-rays and spot cancer that the human eye cannot see, right? So already we're there with that. So it's going to be very powerful stuff. And I do think it's going to let us, like every technological revolution, right? When most of us got into programming, these didn't exist, right? And this has given us an opportunity to build new kinds of applications that are very powerful, and we couldn't have done it before. No one's going to carry a computer around, right? Like this. So Now we're going to be able to do a whole new level of things. I mean, Jim, the stuff you've shown me, that you've shown at the conferences, that you've done with AWS and images and things like that. It's amazing stuff, and it's just going to keep going and going and going. So that's one way that all of us are going to benefit from it, because as it becomes more ubiquitous, we're going to suddenly be able to have new ways of solving problems that we didn't have before.
All right.
We're certainly not going to we're going to be able to get rid of our parking tickets a lot easier. Because there was a lady a couple of weeks ago in the UK, I don't know if anybody read this story, that asked ChatGPT to write to her local council, which was this council, and get her off her parking fine. And it wrote a letter for her, having read other cases of people who dealt with this council.
Sweet.
She got off. She got off. And actually on Friday, I think I was telling you about this earlier, that I was chatting to a friend of mine in the pub who's an accountant, and he just went off on one about why his IT department wouldn't give him voice recognition software on his computer. And I said, well, why don't we write a letter to your IT department and I said, Tony's a great accountant, he's got a very busy life. Can you please write a letter explaining to his IT department in the nicest possible way how the business would benefit from him having voice recognition software? Right. And it wrote this letter. It was about 2.5 pages long. It was a very good read. He sent it off. He phoned me on Monday afternoon. He said, "You never guess what? I have got voice recognition software on my computer."
That's awesome.
Will these corporations use that technology to sway political opinion?
Well, that's
and
a very
get
interesting question.
Favorable to,
Already AI, ChatGPT, political ads.
Yeah, well, I mean, but again, that's just another step. Somebody who was, trying to influence politics before the internet came along didn't have access to all of the information that we have access to now. Well, then they did, and they used that to do their whatever job they're trying to do, achieve whatever goal. Now we've just moved on to the next level of that.
But in the United States in particular, I have no confidence whatsoever that the political powers understand enough of this technology to deal with it. I mean,
No, that's for sure. They think it's something
they're
that
so
isn't.
far behind the curve.
Yeah.
I mean, they never should have let Facebook buy WhatsApp, and they never should have done, so many things, because they're clueless. And they're driven by, well, I don't want to get into politics.
Well, that's why we don't want them legislating it, because you can't legislate something you don't understand, right? I mean, neither option is perfect, right? But if I have to choose, I'm not going to choose to have them legislate this because they don't understand it.
I agree with that. I think that, again, the World Wide Web model is the only thing I can even think of that might be able to manage this.
Yeah.
But
so what may happen, sorry, one second, So what may happen is, I mean, we're thinking of this as there being one engine to rule them all, right? And that's not what's going to happen. You loaded up with your documentation.
I've forked an engine. I've now got a slightly different one.
Right, but the point I'm making is you are able to train it on without the influence of others, right? You're able to train it on your.
It did. The point I was making is that I was training it, and while it didn't know anything about my documentation or my products, it did come with a whole load of knowledge about how many bytes in a gigabyte, how big a picture is.
Right.
It had all that. So it's like training an audio-visual engineer on my platform in 10 seconds.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is I don't see OpenAI deciding, hey, when Yusuf trains this thing, we're going to change how it responds.
No, you wouldn't want it to.
No, you wouldn't want it would fail, and then you wouldn't use it, right? So I'm not worried about that level of it. The point I'm making is that there are going to be a lot of servers running this for very specific purposes. That's what you did. You created one for a specific purpose. And that does make it more of a level playing field, because there isn't a single like Google, right? We don't all run our own search engines, but we will be all running our own AI engines to train it on information that's important to us for our goals, for our businesses, et cetera.
I mean, I think one of the interesting things for me is that this is exposing our weaknesses. Our very reactions to this technology is showing our weaknesses straight away. I mean, fundamentally, it's a quote. I don't know if anybody reads The Oatmeal here, the comic. If you don't, I recommend it. But one of his lines is we're all bags of meat on a rock in outer space, and anything that makes you feel happier about that, knock yourself out. And if, you guys know my feelings on making customers happy. Happy customers, happy day at work, wife doesn't get shouted at, kids get a happy dad, and I think AI's got the potential for making us all a lot happier. I know, Jim can put me in a headlock and say, but you're missing the point. But in actual fact, this goes on now. Everything we're worried about AI probably at the moment goes on worse with human-to-human interaction. And it is just mimicking what we do to each other.
Well,
and you can't stop that. You
Right.
can't legislate it.
Right.
I mean, it's interesting for me that Elon Musk signed that letter because he put in the first money to the Open AI project.
Yeah,
and now
he
he
was-
suddenly
I think-
decided it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that he was either publicity seeking or doesn't really understand it.
He's long-term been opposed to where AI is going.
Yeah, well,
He's been on record for a long time.
But we are very simple creatures fundamentally. We want to get up, we want to be happy, we want to have a nice day, and we're all suckers for that in all aspects of our lives, whether it's through AI, through life, through the weather, and I'm not saying that AI is going to fix the weather for us,
Well,
but if it means that you're all the people in this room, you all have a customer, as you've heard me talk about this before. If it all means your customers are going to be so much happier with what you've given them, so much more happy, and so much keener to talk to you about doing some more work, bring it on.
it's definitely going to help all of us provide information to the people that matter to us in a more efficient way. There's no doubt about that. I mean, and we need to, you can take advantage of that or you can run from it.
Yeah, well, you can say, put down the phone, can you just write a text message to my dad saying how sorry I am that he's lost his best friend?
Right.
You might be completely stuck for words at that
Right.
point. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, you don't have to press send.
Right. Right.
You don't have to, but the thing is, I'm reasonably sure that one of the things that could happen is that your phone will stop. It won't be, hey Siri, send a message to Dad, blah blah. But it'll be, hey Siri, send a message to Dad, just telling him how I feel about him, and I'm so sad that he's lost his friend.
Right.
And that's it.
Right.
And you can be driving. You're less likely to have a crash.
Right.
Dad's going to be much
Well, no,
more
'cause-
happy with the answer, but is that a better world or
No,
not?
because the AI is going to be driving.
Well, yeah. Good point.
All right, look at this, a bunch of hands.
Xojo for a second, rather than all this tragedy stuff.
Yeah.
We already have intelligence built into Xojo. One's been mentioned, autocomplete. Another one, every time I go compile, it finds all sorts of errors in my program. The third one is analyze, which finds deprecated stuff and unused stuff. We already have intelligence in there. To me, the next progression is that another checkbox will be added to the analyze option, which might be find bugs, where it goes through loops and I'm going to go
Yeah.
over arrays or something like
For
that.
sure.
Is that where you, Geoff, think that intelligence is going to be added into Xojo, and what backend might you use, and what sort of things do you think we might be able to do to get intelligence?
Yeah, so large language models are already good at finding bugs in code, okay? Which one you use, that who knows, that's a testing thing. But you do need to provide a large language model. The word large in large language model means that you have to provide it with a lot of data, and the quality you're going to get is going to be based on what you give it. So it can't, pretend for a moment that you give it a whole bunch of code and none of it has any arrays in it. Well, it can't create arrays out of thin air. It has to have code to know how to use an array. So given enough quality data, then yeah, I could totally see it just telling, I could totally see you writing some code and it telling you, hey, you just created a bug, right? Or creating, essentially becoming the unit test on steroids, right? Where it's testing your code behind the scenes and telling you where you made mistakes, which would be great. I would love to have that. I mean, that's going to make all of us better programmers, right? For sure.
How about if Mark's presentation with design patterns?
Right.
It picked a design pattern and started building a design pattern for you.
Yeah, or it might notice that you should be using one and say, hey, you should use a design pattern. And to kind of what you said, to be able to say, well, what is that design pattern? And then it explains it all to you, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting what you said there because, and I showed this to Paul earlier on, one of the questions I asked, sat at the back yesterday listening to your talk, Geoff, was what features do you think Xojo should add to its product to ensure its longevity in the market and to take advantage of the technology as it is now?
Right.
And one of the things it said is actually more concurrency and multi-processing so that at the same time you're writing code in the IDE, it can be bug checking the code.
Right.
You don't have to wait till you press run.
Yeah,
and that's what it said.
It's making a job for itself.
No, but it's, and going back to where we started, if in the, it may not pass the Turing test, but it certainly rattled some cages.
Oh,
when you ask it
sure.
a question, it's going to come up with something you may not have thought about. It may not be accurate, it may not be, but it will certainly, as a human, bring out something in you that goes, oh, hang.
Yeah, and I know it's not always going to be right, but because it's a computer, the thing that we can all do, because we're all technology people, is we can explain to the people around us, hey, yes, it's a computer, but it's not always going to be right. It'll probably be right a lot of the time, maybe most of the time. But you're used to computers, when you ask them a question, getting the right answer, and this isn't quite like that. So if they understand how it works and what it's capable of, they can get the most out of it, and they can avoid the pitfalls, right? We don't want someone asking it a question and assuming that question has to be 100% correct, and then making a decision in their lives that ends in tragedy. We don't want that. So
do you foresee, going to the question about the back end, do you foresee a time when somebody, Google, Microsoft, or whatever, will offer a service where you can upload the forum, you can upload your full documentation, upload all sorts of sample apps, and then if we pay our money on time, that we will be able to go run, maybe it'll upload all of our source code, and it'll then be able to, and we'll have a check that say, find any bugs in my program.
yeah,
well, you can do that now.
Yeah, you can do that now. And you don't need to have a service.
So,
I mean,
you can't do it in Xojo. Do you see Xojo adding that as an option rather than me going to a third party?
Yeah,
Build it into the IDE.
Yeah. We are certainly going to be looking into that very, very carefully. The key thing, though, is that we need to make sure that when it's bug checking, when it's making suggestions, that those are nearly 100% of the time correct. Because otherwise, well, I'll say it a different way. We need to meet the expectation of the user. So if the user's expectation is that it'll be mostly correct, then maybe that's okay. But if the expectation is that it's always going to be correct, and when it's wrong, it's going to reflect poorly on our product, well, that's unacceptable.
Right. Dirk, you had a comment?
Yeah. I'm slightly worried that no one seems to mention any legal issues that are potentially there, because I just heard you say, I upload all my source code. Okay, you've just uploaded it to a learning model. So, does everyone now benefit from your code? you have doctors that already uploaded patient data to the system, and all of a sudden the system knows it. You have corporations that uploaded corporate secrets to it, and the system knows it.
Yeah, I would
There's
say,
legal issues there.
I would say I can say that we would not use a service. It would have to be running on our private servers.
You know, Italy supposedly shut the whole thing down because they were concerned about how the data was gathered.
Well,
And
it's-
what data was
yeah,
gathered.
It's like the things that create images, the AIs that are image creators. You know, they're getting the pieces of those images are coming from images created by people, and these are all questions we are going to have to wrestle with, right? You know, where does copyright end and things like that, right? So.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think, you know, we've talked a lot about that and the IDE. I think we're missing it. Paul asked me about user interfaces.
Yes, that's right. I had a prompt on
Sounds
here
like you have something prepared.
that was about tell me a little bit about how you think AI might change the way we interface with the world, computers today.
Well, it's funny you should ask me that, Paul. I think that's a very interesting question.
That I've never heard before.
Yeah, you've never heard before. I mean, we're in a world now where we spend, if we're writing a system, the guts of the system and the clever stuff that goes off and does something is, I think, in most people's systems, the minority of the work. The majority of the work is writing the human interface so that another user can sit in front of that thing and put the right inputs in to get the job done that they're trying to do. But I think all that's going to change, because I don't think humans will be operating our software in 10 years' time. I really don't. I think large learning models, or whatever we decide to call them, will be. I mean, there's a system, one of the companies that I looked into over the last couple of weeks had a flowchart drawing program. Previously, they sold this flowchart drawing program as, you know, you open a canvas and you start drawing a flowchart. But knowing what the newer version of ChatGPT, and they've actually turned this one off temporarily, but there is a ChatGPT 4 Plus, which can go out onto the internet and make requests for you. Mm-hmm. And they just decided, you know, I tested it a little bit. So what they did, they took their flowchart writing software and they invented a kind of semantic markup language for flowcharts. To say, okay, if you want to draw a flowchart, you draw this to do the first loop, the second loop, the third loop. They wrote a manual on it, fed it into ChatGPT, and then said, can you draw me a flowchart for the process of me coming home drunk from the pub? And it didn't just, you know, bark it out in text that I can, you know, put through Amazon and text-to-speech. It went off, it worked out the code, drew the picture, and gave me the picture back. Now, I think if we're thinking that in 10 years' time there's going to be interfaces to our programs for humans to type stuff in anymore, I don't think so. I think the first thing people are going to be writing is decent JSON, XML, or whatever semantic markup language interfaces to our systems, and writing code out that doesn't have to be read by humans, so it doesn't have to be wordy, it could just be completely factual. Here's a glossary of my terms, here's a glossary of my language, and my thing does this. My picture draws pictures of small white terriers in the style of famous artists, and when you say to ChatGPT, hey, I really need a picture of a small white terrier in the style of whoever, it's going to say, okay, I know that this guy has a service to do that. I'll just do it for you, and there you go. Right. And who's going to need the human interface anymore? So you have an IDE. I don't think you're going to need an IDE. I don't think you're going to have an IDE for putting buttons, and I mean, how archaic is that?
Well, right
now,
now,
I've taken all the light switches out of my house.
Yeah.
I have no light switches.
I have light switches, but they respond to my voice.
But there's nothing. You just walk in the house. It knows you're home. I mean, my front door, I don't have it. There's no keys on it.
Yeah, me too.
And you know, my cat can get in the house without a key. So why shouldn't I be able to get in the house without a key?
Right.
So I think we've got to be, and I think we should keep a very broad mind about it, but we should keep an eye open, because I think these guys that are out there building software for large learning models to use are going to trump us all, because they're going to come up with services that will inherently be able to be used just by being spoken to.
Yeah, I'm sure that something like that is coming. It's hard to predict, the future that far out. I mean, certainly people that predict the future tend to be, they overestimate in the short run, but they tend to underestimate in the long run, because it's hard to predict things, revolutionary things like this, right? I mean, 5 years ago, most people wouldn't have thought that we would have these large language models and all of the other parts to AI. They wouldn't have predicted that we'd be here where we are today. So, but I will say this. The world keeps changing. This is my theme from the keynote. And we have to adapt to that change. And the world has been changing for a long, long time. Occasionally, a few of you here at the conference have heard me say this in conversations. Occasionally I'll hear someone say, "Oh, the world's too complicated. I want to go back to when it was simpler, like in the 1800s." And I say, surgery without anesthesia, right? And you said when we were talking about this, right? You said, "Yeah, I'm dying at the ripe old age of 45," right? So the world keeps changing, and it does get better. I mean, as much as we complain about all the things that go on in the world, I'd rather live in the world right now than the world that was 100 years ago. So.
Yeah, Michael, and then we'll go to you, Ian.
Two things. First is AI. Would you please change my database? I have here a table with names, and I would like to have another text field in there. My IP is that, and my port is that, and my login is this and that password. Would you please do it for me now?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
This can be done in 5 minutes today. Yeah. So what does that mean? That means
We're all going to be out of work.
No.
No, partially. Some of us will be out of work, sure. But let us think about something else. I'm not as confident as you are, because we have now at least half of the complete population is working with things which could be replaced. Lawyers, tax advisors, even judges maybe, even politicians. What now? What if we think we replace half of our population, or they don't have to do anything more, because the complexity of what they do, a tax advisor, could be taken over by the AI, very simply.
It probably will be one of the first to go.
This is today the case, and this will change everything, and it will become an ecological disaster. Economic disaster.
Yeah.
Let's let Ian chime in.
Okay.
I was just going to say, actually what Yousaf described a moment ago has some parallels already in the past. So AI is an enabling technology in the same way that electricity was.
Yeah.
And if you think back to when pre-electricity days, factories were powered by water wheels, and what they would have is they'd have a water wheel, that big shaft going in, and you'd have this big belt going up, and you'd have these really complex systems of belts and pulleys and rotating things to distribute power across a factory. Then electricity came in, and essentially what they did was they basically disconnected the water wheel, put a giant electric motor, and still had all these rods and pulleys and cables and all this insane stuff. And it wasn't until the factories were reconfigured to take advantage of the new technology in quite a different way of delivering power directly to the machines, that's when they were able to take advantage of it. Prior to that, they were getting a bit of a boost in productivity, but not the full benefit.
It takes time. It takes time for technology to become pervasive.
Yes.
That's absolutely true. And the other thing that we have to remember is, look at all the technology we have today. I was born in 1964. Okay, the year the Beatles came to America, and the world has changed a lot technologically in that time, and yet we don't have massive unemployment, right? Things just change. Human beings do things that, they used to do things that now machines do, right? But they just move on to do something the machine doesn't do. It's, even if the machine becomes the judge and the lawyer and the doctor and all that stuff. There's always going to be something that a person does, that the machine doesn't do. So that's a universal truth, I think. It's no different today than it was 100 years ago. It'll change, that's for sure. What we do will change, but I think it's going to continue on.
All right, I'm going to wrap things up by doing a lightning round here. Surprise. So you each get 1 minute.
Oh, no.
To
start with Jim.
I can't speak for 1 minute.
Or less.
What's the prompt?
The prompt is just your closing comments for 1 minute.
Okay.
And I'm starting a timer for each of you. Probably won't be needed for Jim. There you go, you can see it.
I think that there will be instances where this gets out of control. Bob talked about scamming and things like that. There's a lot of negative here. There's a lot of positive, and the question is, as a society, what are we going to be able to control and what we can't control? And I agree with Geoff that the government is the last group that we want to control this, but I also don't want corporations controlling it. So can we find an answer in the middle? And I don't know what that is, but I'm hopeful that there will be something. I'm just concerned that the world is so fractured at this point that it will be very difficult to do that.
All right. With 12 seconds, nicely said.
So does Yusuf get his 12 seconds?
No. No, he does not.
And then can I overrun by 45?
All right, you're up, Yusuf. Don't delay.
So, I think you get the idea that I have a pretty positive outlook to it. I think there's a lot of good that can come from using this technology right now, and I think it can make up for our flaws. It can enhance. It can make us a lot of what we would like and we're talking specifically in the world of software. It can make our software much more what we'd love it to be. The picture we have in our head of what our software is and the picture our users have of what our software is. I think AI can really help close that gap. And yeah, I totally agree that that there's problems everywhere, but there's problems with everything that we have at the moment. And I think the best thing to do, jump on the bandwagon, get thinking about it. It's the next gold rush. We're all entrepreneurs. Go be entrepreneurs.
Look at that, 1 second left. Look at that, that's impressive. Wow. All right, I gotta get, all right. Stop it. All right, you're up, Geoff. Can you also finish with 0 seconds?
We'll see, I will try. So I know that new things can be scary, but I agree with Yusuf that there's tremendous power, and as I said earlier, the genie is already out of the bottle, so there's no putting it back in. So the more that we can each know about it, the better that we can utilize it for good, and the more that we will avoid being the victims of it from the bad actors that use it for evil. So I think that's what we need to be focused on. And because the reality is, to go to Bob's point, you want to stay employed, you got to know what's going on with AI, right? So it's not going to wipe out everybody's job tomorrow or even in 10 years, but it's the new thing and it's here and it's going to be utilized. So make sure you're right on top of it, because here it comes.
All right, you did it, Geoff. That was right on 1 second too, so we got 2 winners. All right, I want to thank our panelists for